So you'll hear no findings today, you'll only hear observations.
For you, Megan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Samolzik. I'm president of Star Community Foundation. Welcome to this beautiful building that we call home. Hope you find it comfortable this morning. On behalf of Star Community Foundation, as well as the Canton Regional Chamber of Commerce, and Denny's on here, Denny's here somewhere right here, we're very pleased to have the opportunity to host this event today. This is, quite frankly, I'm not sure how this morning is going to unfold, so you'll all be part of the initial presentation of research findings from the Fund for Economic Future. The research findings are entitled, What Matters to Metros? Those of you that have had an opportunity to maybe see a synopsis of the findings, I think will agree with me that we have some very challenging issues to deal with, not only here in Canton, Massillon, Alliance areas, but really throughout Northeast Ohio. And hopefully we will have an opportunity to have some of that discussion here at the end of the presentation. The way that we have the morning set up is that following these brief opening remarks, I will turn the program over to Brad Whitehead from the fund. Brad will make some introductory remarks, a little bit of background on the fund for those of you that are not familiar with the work of the fund over the last 10 years or so. And then we will have about a 20-minute presentation from Emily Gar-Pachetti, who is the author of the document, What Matters to Metros. We will then have an opportunity for a question and answer discussion. That will be moderated by Dave Kaminsky from the Regional Chamber of Commerce, as well as Paul Cabot from the Federal Reserve Bank in Cleveland. Following that, we will have, I think as part of the wrap-up, we have Mike Franco here from Civic Commons, who's right here. Mike will talk a little bit about ongoing dialogue, what happens after this meeting, and how can we keep this dialogue going, not only here in Stark County, but probably as important across the region of Northeast Ohio. So with that, I will turn it over to Brad for opening remarks.
Great, thank you, Mark. Good morning. Good morning. And thank you to Mark, the Star Community Foundation, Denny, Dave Kaminsky, and the Canton Chamber for organizing this event this morning. It's terrific, and it's great to see such a great turnout, and also good to see so many friends here today. I know it's a good week when I get to spend 2 out of 3 days in Canton, which I have this week. And this time, I really do want to stop at the Hall of Fame on the way home. I see the gleaming new building. It looks beautiful. So I'm with the Fund for Our Economic Future, which is familiar to a number of you because we work with you, and we have a couple of several of our members here today, including Joni Close from Sisters of Charity and the Stark Community Foundation. And I thought I saw our chair, Deb Hoover. Oh, here, our chair, Deb Hoover from the Burgundy Morgan Foundation in Summit County, based in Hudson, is here this morning, and quite some number of others as well. Excuse me? Yes, we have Bob Jaquay from the George Gunn Foundation, Jers from Cuyahoga County, and so John Couturis, I think. So we have a great turnout from the fund. So the fund is the philanthropic community's regional response to the long-term economic challenges we face here in Northeast Ohio. Our mission is to advance a growing, opportunity-rich economy here in our communities. And we do that across an 18-county area that picks up Greater Canton, as well as the Mahoning Valley, Greater Akron, and Greater Cleveland. not familiar with the fund, you may not directly see a lot of what we do, because the work we do, in often cases, is more behind the scenes. And so we have a pool philanthropic dollars from around the region to try to advance some efforts that work on a regional basis to complement what's happening locally. And so we partnered with the Canton Chamber, the Stark Development Board. I saw Bob Now from the Planning Commission, Adrian O'Neill from the Stark Education Partnership, Steve Paquette from the Stark Development Board, and many others, to try to get behind some of the efforts you have here, whether that's your microenterprise fund, whether it's the manufacturing renewal efforts through the Magnet program, whether it's the business attraction efforts that the Stark Development Board, the Canton Chamber do unfold with groups like Team Neo and so forth. So we'll make grants to organizations to get behind things. We also try to do our part to convene the community to come together around and figure out when and where we might act together. And then, as we'll hear this morning, we try to commission research to help form our opinions. And when we got going 10 years ago, we said a couple of things. We said it's really important in a world where everybody has ideas about what may be important to do, we should focus in on what matters. And we also said we should focus in on what works. So the what matters is what we're going to hear and talk a little bit about this morning. This is the 7th time we've commissioned research to understand what are the underlying factors that seem to be associated with successful economies. And we've looked, as you'll hear from Emily in a moment, across a broad time frame, across broad geographies, to try to say, well, what is it that in fact matters? But then it's also what works. And that's where you come in. Because a principle we hold at the fund is, while we're working on a lot of regional stuff, we know that 80% of what has to happen is happening at the local level. And so we are striving to have alignment and listening to how you process this information and you think about what it means for Stark County, Canton, Massillon, Lyons, and so forth. And then we'll use that to inform the sorts of things we do, and of course we're hopeful that you'll use this information to inform some of the efforts that you're pursuing as well. And in fact, I'll just close before introducing Emily. One of the things I found most fascinating about this pursuit of economic competitiveness is that in order to make change, you have to have all these different pieces and parts working together. You know, the work that Joni and her organization is doing on social services has to link to what Adrian's doing on education, which links to what Bob is doing in terms of infrastructure planning, which links to what Steve is doing in terms of the economic development activities. And in such a world, you've got all these pieces and parts that have to come together, but nobody gets to be in charge. It's not. In so many ways, we use the analogy of corporations and so forth, but in this way, economic competitiveness isn't like a company, because there is no CEO. And so the only way we can get collective action is when we interact and find ways to share ideas with each other, and to see if we can come up, at least as a starting point, with a common view of the situation and a common view of what needs to be done. And so with all humility, you know, that's what we're hoping is a little something we can add to the discussion here in Stark County today, is can we start to get to a commonly shared view of what is the situation. So this work that you're seeing has been led by my colleague Bob Duquet from the George Gunn Foundation, who leads on behalf of our funders the research activities, and so hopefully we'll have a chance for him to chime in through the course of the conversation today. But then the work has been most directly led by Emily Garpachetti, who has partnered with Cleveland State University. We have Ziona Ostrin and Marissa here in the back of the word, who did the heavy lifting on the analytics. But Emily is a member of the staff of the Fund for Economic Future. She looks out for our issues related to grant making, evaluation, and then spearheads a lot of our research work. turn it over to you, and then we'll look forward to hearing what you all make of what we think is some pretty interesting findings.
All right. All right. Thank you all for being here today. I am impressed by the folks in the room, and if I get a little jittery, I'll just breathe a little bit, so forgive me. Okay, so I'm here today because the fund, and I think your partners here in Stark County and in Canton, really think that there are some salient findings here that might be relevant to your work. So I'm going to go ahead and share What Matters to Metros. It was released on May 2nd, and it really tries to get to what drives economic growth in the region. Okay, the Fund for Our Economic Future, like Brad said, it's a collaboration of over 50 philanthropic organizations across 16 counties, and we're really dedicated to promoting this comprehensive regional competitiveness agenda. Here are some of the partners we work with. Some of the logos might be relevant to you all in the room, I'm sure. I won't spend too long on that. But the idea of the research is that it informs our strategy. Our grant making is strategic. What we do is strategic. It comes with thought and it's data driven. And Bob Jaquay, sitting right here, knows better than anybody that this is the bedrock and the underpinning for everything I do is everything we do is the information, is the data on what really drives the economy. Okay, so here we have this year's report. As I said, the first report, or as Brad mentioned, the first report came out of a white paper in 2006 from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. These were our most recent reports you saw here. So this is the one released May 2nd, entitled What Matters to Metros. The emphasis here is not so much on a dashboard, whereby we're going to measure ourselves from year to year on things like education or workforce. Its importance is really that it tells us what of all these indicators actually matters to the economy. And here are the main findings. So these are three factors. The first is education and innovation are more interconnected and interlinked than we've seen in the past. The second is that self-employment, business starts, entrepreneurship tend to happen in more diverse and integrated metropolitan areas. And the third, the most salient and probably sobering finding, is that the metropolitan areas who have grown the most in terms of jobs over the past 2 decades, the metro areas that have grown the most in terms of jobs are some of the most unequal, poorest, highest poverty, highest crime places in the country. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. I think that's one that we'll spend the most time with. Okay, so how did we get to these? Just real quick, a little about the methodology. We looked at 115 metropolitan areas across the country. 115. They represent about, I think it's 38% of the US population. They range from metros that are roughly the size of Canton, which is about 400,000, to some of those larger metros like San Diego that are about 3.5 million. And of course, the ones we care about most are these 4 metros here in Northeast Ohio. It's Cleveland, Akron, Youngstown, and of course, Canton. The region represents $166 billion in gross product and over 4 million people. Okay, so of these, all of these 115 metros, we looked at data across 55 different variables. These variables range from things like bachelor degrees to broadband to housing vacancies to poverty to obesity. We asked experts throughout the region, what matters to you all? We'll put them in the data, and this is what we did. These 55 different variables grouped into 6 factors that you see here. The most important factors are the first 3 on this slide, which we mentioned before. They represent 50% of the variation from metropolitan area to metropolitan area. So, out of all those little pieces of data and all that data crunching, thank you Ziona and Marissa, we come up with this, which is really the meat of our results. We looked at growth. This is an important point. We looked at growth across 4 different measures: gross metropolitan product, jobs, per capita income, and productivity. So when we say economic growth, we're not just talking about jobs, we're not just talking about incomes. All 4 of these things are important, and we wanted to understand how the different variables interact and affect and influence and are associated with these 4 measures of economic growth. So let's take that first one, education and innovation. You can see that it's positively associated with GMP, per capita income, and productivity. It has no association to jobs. So this might not be your education and innovation, while extremely important to the economy, a bedrock to the economy. It's not your job creation strategy, but that helps you read this a little bit, and we'll go further into education and innovation. So these are the places in darker green with higher levels of advanced degrees, higher levels of patents, tech transfer, bachelor's degrees. And you can see that if you look at all those little blue dots, those are all metropolitan areas. There's a positive association with things like per capita income growth, education and innovation, positive association, but pretty flat, no association with job growth. Okay, so an example of one of the metros that scored really high on this factor is Durham-Chapel Hill, and I think it's an example of one of the many metros that really have those anchor institutions like university systems and hospital systems that are incredibly important to the economy, and they show the integration of education and innovation more so than they have before. And then we come back to Canton, and we have, although Canton ranked fairly low on this factor, Canton metropolitan area ranked 106 out of the 115 metros. We know we have incredible assets in the region and a lot of work and activity being done that I'm sure we'll talk about after this discussion, but such as I think there's the fuel cell research and the wind energy research going on at Stark State. Things like this, I mean, this is what's gonna bring Canton up. This is the type of activity that's gonna really make a difference. So now we move to entrepreneurship and inclusion. This vector here, you see that it's associated with every measure of economic growth. GMP, jobs, per capita income, and productivity, positively associated with economic growth in those areas. I think the important thing here to realize is when you look at the metropolitan areas that are associated with economic growth, and with this fact that score highest in this factor, you're gonna see a lot of diverse profiles of metros. And that's because when we talk about entrepreneurship, we're talking about the mom and pop shops and self-employment that are generally population serving, but we're also talking about the high-tech business startups, the more innovation-led entrepreneurs, et cetera, et cetera. So Austin, Texas would be one of those examples of a really successful entrepreneurial ecosystem. And then we have a lot of activities also going on in Northeast Ohio to connect those disconnected populations to opportunities in these emerging industries and emerging sectors. So then we move on to, I think, this most surprising finding, which is that those high growth places tend to be the most unequal and the poorest places. And you can see that in this factor we call economic polarization, where it's positively associated with job growth, but negatively associated to income growth. Here's the map on that one. And you can see that it's a lot of the border towns, the south, the west, that has been hit the hardest by the housing crisis. And then we're gonna take you to this little table here. And I want you to focus on an extreme example of this phenomena, which is McAllen, Texas, where if you just looked at job growth on the right, it's 109% over the last 2 decades. Looks great. Oh, McAllen, Texas, they did really well. Well, then you look over on the left column in the red, economic polarization, one of the most poorest, unequal, highest poverty, highest crime places in the US. If you go to the bottom, you'll see that these are the places that scored in the blue pretty well on, they if not kept inequality the same, they improved. And there are very rare places where you see blue on the left and blue on the right. That is to say that there are few places that achieved both job growth and less inequality. So Las Vegas is probably the negative example, right? We're pretty familiar with it. So they've suffered through the boom and bust economy over the last 2 decades, and they're left as one of the poorest, most unequal places in the country. And then you move into another example that's the positive example of Denver, Colorado, that has really seemed to balance growth and opportunity well. They have seen above average job growth, but they've also been able to curtail the inequality and lessen the poverty over time. Coming back to Canton, there are some incredibly important historical and current assets that you all know far better than I, and that is places like Diebold and Timken and Altman Hospital, where there really are assets here to be leveraged. And I think coming out of the recovery, it's going to be really important to think about what's working here in this ecosystem that doesn't just provide for any job, but good jobs, right? That give us the good wages and the stronger middle class economy. So, zoom out, all that data. I'm done with those 3 factors. So now we're gonna look big picture, what does the economy look like here in Northeast Ohio compared to the US? So this is economic output from 1990 to 2011. You can see in general, probably not a surprise to many of you, Northeast Ohio has underperformed the national economy for decades. But between 2010 and 2011, we actually outperformed the US on 3 really important measures: output, productivity, and per capita income. You can see Northeast Ohio had higher rates of growth there. And those are good lead indicators for employment, because if productivity is higher, you get higher wages, that is more likely to lead to hires. So we got output, productivity, per capita income. Coming out of the recovery, we are performing better than the nation. There was only a couple other times that's happened in the past couple decades. And what I want to show here is that this has happened before, but we dropped back down again after the 90s recession. And so what we don't want is to drop back down again in this recovery. We've recovered quicker, so let's figure out how to sustain that growth and maintain that growth over the long term, so it's not just a boom and bust economy again. Okay, I'm gonna end there, but I just wanted to end with a couple main points. And look at that, I didn't even use my note cards. All right, so we really, I think the most salient point here is that in order to keep this long-term trajectory, we can look at other metros like the McAllens and the Las Vegas and say, okay, there are obviously opportunities here in the recovery. We look really good right now in the recovery, but let's figure out how to stay there. And literature tells us that, when you have high levels of inequality and poverty, you're probably not gonna stay on top. It's not sustainable. So I think some of these discussions that we're gonna have over the next half hour, 40 minutes, I think they're gonna be really important to understand what of these is most relevant to you guys here in Canton, in order to make sure that growth is not only sustained, but shared with a broad set of the population and not just a segment of it. With that, I will turn it over to Dave Kaminsky, I think. Where are you, Dave? Great. And Paul Cabot from the Cleveland Fed. Thank you very much. And I'm open to questions of clarification as needed.
Lots of questions. But our job is not to ask Emily questions, but to ask you questions. So we've thought about what we learned in the outline of the study and have framed some questions for discussion and hope they inspire you to have
discussion. So let's start out by saying this. The report indicates that job growth doesn't always translate into income growth. In fact, job growth in many metros is instead associated with higher income inequality and poverty and crime, maybe the most challenging result of this research. So why do you think that is so? Why do you think that job growth doesn't always translate into income growth, and in fact, job growth is associated with polarization and more poverty in the community? John?
There's underemployment. A lot of the jobs are temporary, low skill, low wage.
Okay. Anybody see that, or see a different factor at work in why job growth doesn't always lead to income growth or overall wealth for a community?
Some jobs simply pay minimum wage. And also the applicant doesn't have any skill or training perhaps beyond minimum wage. So
Is that a trend that's more recent?
that's a gut feeling. I have no.
Well, that's what this is about, is to share thoughts.
And so if you have a population in any community that has low education level, even though the parts of the community may be rising in education, you still have them as part of your populace. So they still contribute to these numbers. And so if jobs come along that pay minimum wage and they're willing to accept those jobs, they're willing to be viable applicants for those jobs, yes, they have jobs. Unemployment would drop. But the income level is not that great. But I also have a question, because the question is, can paraphrasing it, but can job growth see still low income level? And I want to reverse that a little bit, because I think we have a little bit of a phenomenon, even in the presentation, that we need to be aware of. Can wealth translate into no job growth? And my example of that is that, we have heard in Carroll County that there's a tremendous amount of new wealth because of oil and gas. I'm not sure a lot of those people that have signed land leases or sold property or mineral rights are hiring people. I mean, they're receiving, so the Carroll County, this is making any sense, the Carroll County per capita income may rise. Actually, I've heard somewhere that it's gone almost a cellar to the top, which may have a reflection on some of those 2010 and beyond figures for our particular area. So more maybe an answer to or a comment to your first, but also a thought to it.
Mike, you had a thought?
I thought oftentimes when we see a quick bump, we connect it to stimulus or short-term programs. And I can speak to schools where certain programs would come into your flow, your revenue stream for a short period of time, a biennium budget per se, and then it would be removed. So if you didn't take that on as a company, as part of your accepted culture, and then your investment, that wasn't going to sustain itself. So you could have an uptick in a particular data set, and then over a period of time actually see less, because if you didn't keep it, you had then perhaps to lay people off or reduce your force. So what was in play there would be something that would be government-oriented stimulus or something short-term that's an infusion that would probably skew those at different times depending on what the data.
Well, taking education as an example, how successful have the school districts been in trying to sustain some of those programs that were started with a stimulus bump or a funding bump?
It was always very intentional to be careful what programs you would actually connect your district to. If it was reading or something that was core-minded, knowing that it was going to sustain itself over time and it was going to be a part of your competencies, you stayed with your investment. If it was something or some of those dollars you were careful of even signing on for in the beginning.
I'm just curious, how do you find job growth? Is it all jobs, is it part-time jobs, full-time jobs, independent contractors, or all the above? Because it makes a difference as to what categories you're talking about as far as jobs increase.
Right.
If your wages are becoming lower, obviously, it seems like you're having more part-timers than you are full-timers. So full-time jobs with benefits, et cetera, tend to be a lot higher. But how's that measured? How are jobs measured?
Is there an answer in the studies, Yona, as to
Yeah.
what was
There
covered?
is no, I think it's a really good point, there's no difference between part-time and full-time jobs.
Okay,
So I think you are on to an important
okay.
issue.
Mary, comment from Mary?
Yeah, I got two ideas on this one, and kind of following what our president from the chamber had commented on in reference to education.
Denny.
Everybody knows, if I say Denny, they know. Denny Saunier from the. The one thing, an example of that in Canton, we have a large population, large percentage of our population that has little to no education beyond high school. Very large percentage. They don't have a lot of skills. We brought in a company called VXI Global Solution, many of you are aware of that. They've hired over 1,000 people in the last 2 years. So we've taken 1,000 people, and these are jobs that are making 10, 12 bucks an hour. So you got 1,000 families now that have increased their income up to that salary level that were making nothing or perhaps on welfare. And that's improved our situation for those families. But when you take those $12 an hour jobs now and you average them with the other jobs that were out there, you're lowering the average earnings for our community because there was no average before that. So this is an example where you've improved our community by bringing in some low-paying jobs, but you've lowered our average. So more people are working, but the average has gone down. And that's a perfect example in inner city areas where you have large populations of people that don't have a lot of skills. And when you get those types of jobs, Walmart comes in and brings in 300 jobs, those types of things, you are improving the community, but you're lowering the average. That's one example. The other example that I'd like to point out is when I looked at that map, it went through pretty quickly, so I may not be exactly the same, but it appeared to me that in those areas where you increased a lot of jobs, in those cities or metro areas where job growth was high, those were typically in southern states. They were right-to-work states. And those were states that a tinting company that might be paying 20 or 25 bucks an hour for labor for their factories, that open up a factory down there might pay 10 or 12 bucks an hour. And so what's happening is you've got a lot of companies that have moved south, which we've all seen that trend, into areas where they don't have to pay union wages, and so now they're working for less. That's lowering the wage as well while job growth is going up. So look at those cities in the south. My guess is that's the impact on them. The inner city areas like ours, it's a reverse because as we create jobs, they're lower paying jobs. So those are two indicators that would make that trend in both cases increase jobs while slowing the average.
Ed Jarris from Cuyahoga County. I heard an interesting statistic. It was kind of shocking to me, but it was also instructive. It was accurate. This was at a conference from a fellow from the Brookings Institute. We were talking about B&M Steel down in Youngstown, which is a boon to that economy. But he says even at full capacity, that plant would probably employ about 700 people, whereas in the 70s, that plant at full capacity might employ 20,000 people. So what you have is with automation, even the good jobs, the good union jobs, are far less than they were in the past. So now you have 19,000 people who might have been employed in the 1970s who were without jobs, and then I think it goes to the mayor's point, which is it's any port in the storm for the civic leaders who are looking for any jobs for folks to get, so it's more attractive to bring in a low-paying company or a retail store or a phone banks or whatever to give these jobs to the folks because the automation has taken away a lot of the opportunities that previously existed.
Yes, sir.
I think you can't ignore the fact that most companies that have been aware for the last 20, 30 years that the demographics of not only the country but Ohio are changing, and that ultimately is going to be a labor shortage. So you substitute technology for human resource, and in that conversion you lose per capita income. So that's one point. Second thing is, in Ohio we need to look at the fact that we've got largely mature industries which means by business less profit margin, which means you constantly look for ways to reduce your cost. But that's countered by, and you also have to have programs that deal with new product development and innovation in that, which I think your study recognizes. That's the answer to that, is to get companies onto new products and services. So I think you're seeing a transition in Ohio from the past to the new, and hopefully that trend line starts going up over the last, now and for the next 10 years, 20 years, because we're changing.
I wonder, one of the things that was an aha for us is that we've always thought about, let's pursue both jobs and incomes. And, we had the goals, jobs and incomes, jobs and incomes. And this is, I think, helping us see that it's a little more nuanced than that. And I agree with the mayor's point, Ed's point, and so forth, that a job is better than no job, but not all jobs are created equal. And if we use as the fund in our work, but then I don't know what is appropriate here, what is the overarching goal? And it may increasingly be for us this idea of incomes. And then we think about, well, what's associated with that? And it builds on the point you just made, Steve, that means that we need innovation. That means we need investment in places. That means we need investment in education and educational attainment. And the common theme in all that is it does mean we need investment. Whereas policies that really are just promoting jobs, jobs, jobs might skew you towards minimizing public and private investment in order to have a climate that has the lowest possible costs.
We've said from Stark County's perspective for years with our legislators, while jobs tends to be the measure, jobs go up and down based on the economy. The root of building the economy is building wealth and building investment, so we agree exactly.
And this gets really real when we start thinking about things that are happening in states, regional, and so forth, about whether we will extend the Ohio Capital Fund to invest in entrepreneurs, whether we will renew the Third Frontier in another 2 years' time, what we will do with investment technology tax credits. So it's not just an abstract conversation.
Dr. King.
But if you don't bring in, I mean, I obviously, I don't think anybody in the world would disagree with that type of thinking. But there's still a reality. And this goes back to what the mayor said. And what I was trying to portray in my first comment, that you still have a large section, many times of your population, that don't have skills for training. And yes, if you can have those people employed, they're going to be employed on way down on the wage scale. But what is the alternative to that? And then when they are employed, they go into the numbers. And it's going to pull that, pull some of those convertibles down. But you still have to deal with that in a community, or else it just continues to cost your community more in services and support. So, I mean, I think we need to, and education, when you look at part of the presentation, I don't know if I misinterpreted this or not, but it seemed like education didn't have a link to jobs. And I struggle with that.
It's not that it's not positively or negatively associated with it.
I still struggle with that.
So,
But-
okay.
But the educational attainment is most strongly correlated with the growth of per capita income. So it is essential investment for long-term better economic performance.
Dr. King, next.
Yeah, David King, London University. One of the questions that comes to mind behind the question of job growth and wealth on one hand and polarization on the other, Emily, this may be a question for you. We didn't stay very long on the 55 variables, which is very understandable. But the question that I would broadly describe as community engagement, what does that look like in these metropolitan areas? Things like the frequency with which a school levy passes. Is there a thriving arts community? Is there a kind of a regional identity? The kind of things that stimulate not just engagement in that region, but also investment.
Yeah, there was some discussion of it. I think there were a couple of variables that fell out of the factor group. They just didn't group together well in the Metro sample. We did things like arts occupation. So that was grouped with education and innovation, which is very highly correlated with all those things, not necessarily job growth, but yes, with GMP, yes, per capita income. But I think that's a great point, and I think that we do have some indicators, but they fell off. Yeah.
I was in this room a couple of days ago to talk about shale and the gas and oil boom and what that meant for our regional economy. And there was one phrase that was uttered by one of the panelists that I think is highly relevant to this conversation, and what I think that this approach, this research approach, leads us to. The speaker talked about how we try to separate out the fleeting and focus on the enduring. What's the short term, the noise that keeps us from getting to the stuff that really is the most important and the highest order for investment, for time? And to my way of thinking, we need to be able to work on multiple levels and multitask. There's an inherent good to attracting a company that will hire individuals who otherwise are not employed. That's a better situation than them not being employed. But at the same time, we collectively need to be focused on what kinds of investments we collectively can make that have the long-term implications for an enduring and resilient economy. So the kinds of notions about education and the kinds of things about finding ideas that can be commercialized from which we can create companies. How can we use that, foster the notions of entrepreneurship that, who thought ball bearings at some point were going to be anything? There was some garage tinkering that went on in the, 1880s that led to, a very robust economy in the last century in this place. That kind of, how do we capture those kinds of things that can have really long-term projection? And I think while this does not get us to the weeds of the specifics, it gives us guidance on how to flesh out the long-term thrust that can be applied both regionally and locally that knit up to a regional resilience that we strive for.
Something that I think also needs to be considered, and it would be interesting, I believe your study would have shown this or found this, but in communities, regions that have excelled, what is the cooperative level within those communities? Is everybody kind of in a sub-region? Yeah, let's call this MSA a sub-region. So it's within Stark County we have Canton, Alliance, Massillon. Then you have townships and North Canton. What is in the successful communities the ability to work collaboratively within those areas and all move to a same strategy,
Right.
instead of everybody having their own independent, selfish strategies? Where is the leadership on that? Where is the community leadership, the elected leadership, the business leadership? And the feeling that they're all part of one community.
Just real quickly, I wanted to say like this in the community engagement piece, there are data that get at some of that, governmental units per 1,000 population, for example, and it's all public, it's on the website. But I think that is a perfect example, like Bob said, there is so much room, this is just laying the platform for all these much more rich, deeper conversations. And that's one of them, is what are the communities that have done well and what are the component pieces of their performance? So that's one area where we do hope to dive a little deeper.
And I have to jump on that just a little bit, only because I'm aware this is separate from this research, but my Federal Reserve colleagues in Boston and Philadelphia have done some work looking at declining older industrial cities and did some case studies, Springfield, Massachusetts, Reading, Pennsylvania, those places, and Out of that work came leadership and collaboration were the two primary, most important factors for either slowing the decline of the older industrial city or holding its level. And none of the cities through the recession actually, sprang back to life, but it was an important factor. The other conclusion that came out of that at a high level was that leadership can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be elected officials. It doesn't have to be anchor institutions, which is always thought of, that they have to come together. But this research showed that the community needs to come together. Someone needs to take leadership, and then that's the first step in stabilizing the decline in some of these older industrial cities as jobs have left, have people out-migrated, all of those factors. So that work has been done in the system, and I think that's why we're trying to work with the fund on this, because that result of leadership is really important.
When I came into the room today, I saw Adrienne O'Neill, and I was brought back to a trip that she and I took a couple of years ago to the Puget Sound region, to Seattle, Tacoma area, that was in fact organized by a couple of folks that organized today's event, Terry Ewell and Chris Thompson in particular. And I was marveling at how that region, which is a very robust region, had a table that was large enough and was sophisticated enough to work on a regional scale all around Puget Sound, but still had enough give so that the mayor and the Chamber of Commerce in Tacoma could work diligently on stuff that was uniquely Tacoma. And yet at the same time, the folks from Seattle and Everett and the Vashon Island and Tacoma could work together and sort of work and strategize on how to make sure that when Boeing's headquarters went to Chicago, they could still retain the driver of their economy, which was the production of aeronautics stuff at Boeing. They still were able to figure out the strategy to do what was most important for the region as a whole. So there was this unique sort of what's Canton, what's Cleveland, what's Akron, what's Lorain, what's Doylestown, and yet at the same time figure out a table that could rise to regional significance. We've been at this for 10 years and deeply value what the Stark Community Foundation and the Sisters of Charity bring to our collaboration, but we're still groping with how to do stuff on a regional level that's significant and yet fully capture the value of a robust local set of civic interventions to make a place work economically as it ties up to the region. This is really complicated stuff. And so hopefully today's offering of data and of insights that we've used effectively to allocate the $70-some million that we've been able to aggregate over the last decade can also be useful to you potentially as you, as a community, decide these kinds of matters and how they might tie up to the region. Most of you in Stark County leadership would joke about or despair about the parochialism within the county. Canton is not Massillon, Massillon is not Jackson Township, Jackson Township is not Plain Township, Plain Township is not, you name it. So what do we do to overcome that if overcoming that is the key to collectively making progress? What can we do that we haven't done before, or do we just sit around and joke about our in-county rivalries? What could we be doing? What could we be doing to bring people together on that? Adrienne?
I think that one of the things we could be looking at is aggregating the data. Because when you look at the aggregated data, it is a different picture than when you look at the individual data. And it makes for just a real picture of what a group collectively could do. So you've seen the data that we put together with regard to all of the school districts' performance. When you look at that, it is just astonishing. If you look at each individual school district and the number of students that were served, it's not as significant as looking at 64,000 students all put together in the county. If you began to do that for all of the counties, at least in the education sector, and if you did it in the higher education sector, I think what you would see
effort that involves a number of people in this room, in which the philanthropic community is partnering with the business community to see whether we can align the philanthropic and business investments around the regional strategy. It's something called the Regional Economic Competitiveness Strategy. It's chaired by Bill Christopher, former executive from Alcoa, and Tim Timken from this part of the region sits on the small executive committee. So this data and other data is the underpinning of that regional strategy work. How and that regional strategy is across several pieces. Some of it's about how can we create a set of new industries or help existing industries transition into higher growth areas. But then it also recognizes the other pieces of the equation. It's business, it's people then, and this evidence, of course, reinforces that we need to be investing not only in workforce but in education. And so there's a set of initiatives in and around that, and then the other one is around place. And this question of, well, if we have public investments, they're public investments in what? What are the place-based investments? What's happening with infrastructure and the like? And that's where some of the collaborations with the planning groups and so forth. And so this hopefully is the analytic underpinning for a lot of that work. That is then translating to some initiatives that are regional in scope, or even statewide in scope. How can we get the Ohio Capital Fund renewed? But then it also really will rest on what happens in a local community. And so Steve Paquette is on a team that's looking at how does the retention and expansion activities get coordinated better. Or Denny and Dave, I believe, have been leading the charge in thinking about how do we get not only the Ohio Capital Fund renewed, but then how are we spurring entrepreneurship here in the Stark community. So just to wrap up then on this, but what we need then is, to your point, Adrian, this common shared view of what is the data that we're all going to keep score by, and then hopefully we also get agreement on what success looks like. And if success is we're saying, look, we want good jobs on an enduring basis, and any jobs are a bridge to good jobs, but it's ultimately about good jobs. And then if we all say, well, that's the goal, then we can start self-organizing ourselves to get that.
You know, one of the observations about changes in Stark County from my perspective, so we're through a generational change where people probably did age 40, 35 to 50. Many of them were told you didn't have to have higher education because you would work for some of our largest companies, and you know, I mean, they're great jobs, great benefits. And today, when you sit in and out of sessions where you're looking at students talking about why they're in college or why they're getting more education, it's because they realize there's no transition. You know, today they have to make it on their own. So often you go to college students and say, why are you here? And the answer is because, you know, I need to support myself in the future. So that's a big change in Stark County. And I think it's been evidenced probably about the last 10 years. People really start to get that. That's why you have Stark State growing from 4,000 people to 16,000 now. I mean, big numbers because people get, now I've got to make it for myself. So somehow you have to factor that in. And then, you know, as a community, you've always got to be aware of what the region's doing and trying to find out where you're similar and where you can be unique. And so, you know, the way a community works with the region is you take the best of the region, but you try to differentiate yourself so that people say, well, yeah, you got to look at this, here, and that. So it's a very complicated change, but I think, you know, people in this room get it and are trying in different fields to make that transition as well.
Well, that's a nice bridge to kind of the next questions that we have to tee it up. So you know, you mentioned Stark State. How can we build on those types of efforts and others to strengthen our educational attainment, to have a higher level so that good jobs can be obtained by our folks, or because there is a transition that you touched upon, what thoughts do you have to transition while we have this generation that is getting a higher degree of skill and education for the remainder of the population, whether those are folks at middle age or elsewhere, so that they could get jobs, is this kind of transition. So how can we elevate in Stark County this education to get these better jobs?
Deb Hoover, I come here today wearing a couple of hats, chair of the fund and then also president and CEO of the Burton Martin Foundation based in Hudson, which as many of you know focuses on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education. So as we think about entrepreneurship, obviously it's a vehicle for people of all ages to start businesses, but entrepreneurship education at all levels, starting with young children up through high school and into college, it's a way to kind of hook students into the educational process so that they see that the tools that they're learning are relevant not only to their lives today in school, but also to their futures and their income potential. So I think as we think about school programs and great programs you have here in Stark County like Junior Achievement and others, that we think about entrepreneurship throughout the educational process as a way to keep kids in school and keep them engaged. So I'll offer that up as a suggestion.
We rank very low in self-employment and entrepreneurship and inclusion. We rank low on racial integration, and that's why our innovation and entrepreneurship ratings are so low relative to the other metros. So what can we do about that?
Dave, can I ask a question related to that? Because I cannot speak, because I don't know what the conversation is here, but I have been struck in conversation elsewhere in the region that this phenomenon we have of a resurgent regional economy, yet rising poverty, in many people's minds feels like two separate issues. That we have an economic thing going on, and then we have a social or moral thing going on. Where this research and other research I've read have said that, in fact, those are really intertwined, and feel what you may feel about the social and moral issues related to poverty, that it's a core economic issue, and that one of the factors that will limit our growth is the fact that we have this rising polarization and these persistent issues. And so I think it's great if the departure point for the conversation is, well, what do we do? But in a lot of areas of the region, there's not a felt belief that those opportunity issues are really core economic issues. And I'm just curious, are those two worlds here, or is it have you gotten to the point where it is one world and we talk about, well, what to do about, as opposed to how do we take these two different worlds, growth and opportunity, and pull them together?
I think they're two worlds.
Sorry?
I said, I think there are two worlds right now. What we have and where we're going.
I want to, if somebody wants to answer that before I start, I'm going to ask some other question for you.
I just want to say, we can talk about well-paying jobs. We can talk about innovation. We can talk about all these lofty goals, and each and every one of them. But there's getting there. You can't forget about how the hell do you get there? If anybody in the room that's in manufacturing, ask any manufacturer, do they have jobs available? The answer could be, yeah. What's your biggest challenge? Getting somebody to pass a urine test. I mean, we're not going to fix that here today. But if we're unaware of that, we can sit here today and all we have to do is put some plan together to get better jobs. Look around the room today. This is not a very inclusive group. yet when the figures come out, it's important to everybody. You know, a couple of years ago, there's a true story. You remember when Forbes.com did the fastest dying cities? We all remember. Because 4 of the 10 were in Ohio. Canton was one of them. There, you had just, I think, come on.
Would you stop reminding me?
At least I remembered your name.
You said mayor.
Let me just say, Canton was one of them. And when that story came out, unless you read the fine print, that it was the Canton-Massillon MSA, which is all of Stark County and Carroll County. I heard people in Jackson Township and in North Canton and in Massillon and elsewhere saying, that damn Canton. Yeah, boy, they have problems. It was all of our problems. And we are so entrenched here. I think it's going to be generational, to be honest with you. But we got to start something. To get the community trying to, you're not going to solve any of these or attract any of these ideas unless the whole community is trying to work. The question is, how do you do that? Is a very important question.
I'll come back. I mean, he tied into it a little bit. You made the comment about racial diversity, and I'm going to talk about just diversity in general in reference to the communities that are succeeding on that list and the ones that are not. As Denny mentioned, I look around this room here, not a lot of diversity in this room. And to me, that's a big problem for our community, because we do have a lot of diversity, or at least we have some diversity in our community that should be represented better. But other cities that are doing well, again, look at those areas that are doing well, it's not just about black and white. It's about international investment in cultural diversity and a lot more inclusion to different ethnic groups and countries and investment. And a lot of those new dollars for growth are coming from international investment. We're seeing it from the development fund. When we're working with businesses that are looking for site selectors, we have a chance to work with them. We're getting more companies from China, from Europe, from India, from Israel. Those are the companies that are looking to invest and expand. We got to find a way to make them feel comfortable in this community, because they're going to other communities where they are welcome and see like faces, and it makes it a little easier for them to settle down in those areas. So to me, that, I don't know how big of a factor that was in your study, but I think that's a huge factor in reference to what we are doing or not doing here compared to other areas that are succeeding.
Emily, that wasn't, you may want to speak to that because it is a factor.
So the
Dissimilarity index and the international index and its association with
Yeah,
factors.
so, well, it factors in a couple different ways. So we did have there are indexes that measure segregation. So we had it for African Americans and we also had it for Hispanics. And that's the one where we saw associated with this idea of entrepreneurship and inclusion in more diverse areas, so higher percentage of foreign-born populations. So those are, regardless of income, generally, foreign-born populations, less segregated places, were associated with every measure of growth. So that includes jobs, that includes per capita income, productivity, GMP, and those were in that second factor that we talked about.
Well, I think an interesting topic to talk about from an education perspective, and I'm kind of drawing these conclusions on the fact that we run one of our major programs is college scholarship programs for all students in Stark County. And I think there are opportunities for certain segments of those that may be underrepresented to find champions within their own ethnicity to champion education. Because we'll have applications from students, and one of the criteria that we look for is have you overcome obstacles. And we have students from inner city schools of African American descent that explain obstacles oftentimes as they've overcome. They're in the early college at Timken, and they're proud of that. And they had to overcome kind of bullying and teasing from their own friends, where education is not cool.
Where conversely, you see the Asian populations where if you're not getting A's and B's, or if you're not in AP classes, you kind of frowned upon within that group. And I think if we can find locally and regionally some people that can champion education is cool. Education does open up opportunities to certain areas of the population. I think that might help to go a long way in kind of changing that tide over time, so that you have higher levels of attainment and higher levels of achievement in those populations that we, all of us, try to include.
I like the championing of education idea, but to bring it back to the P-test, which I've heard a couple times in different contexts, I think it's a value proposition problem. I think it's not worth the $12 an hour to change your lifestyle. I think the lifestyle change has to be worth the wage. People sober up when they want a $30 an hour job because it's going to change their whole life. They're going to be able to have a family now. They're going to be able to do all this stuff, but not for 20 or not for 15. You know?
So it's not worth the money to get sober?
Totally. It has to be worth it. In order to get sober, it has to be worth it.
John?
So maybe piggybacking on that point, in schools at a young age, middle school age, start talking about careers and what's necessary. If you want to work in a hospital and you have a criminal background, or if you can't pass the drug test, it's probably not happening. So aim people at some of these higher paid careers, get them to start dreaming about these things early, but also tell them what you're going to need. Is it a science background, good communication skills, what kind of education will you need, and get them going in that direction early on.
Or if you're going to work the machine press, maybe I can get my college paid for free, right? Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
John Paturis, Mark's counterpart at the Akron Community Foundation. I remember about a year and a half ago, I was at a Akron Chamber Board meeting, which I am a member, and I'll never forget a CEO of a local business looked at the president of Kent State University and he said, don't send us any more liberal arts majors. And as a liberal arts major myself, after I took offense to that, it struck me, who has responsibility to ensure that the young children, students today, are entering a field of study that will allow them to stay here, to buy homes here, to raise their families here. I have 3 children in their 20s in Bowling Green, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. They're not here anymore. And do the business leaders have that responsibility? Do the colleges, do the high schools, and the guidance counselors to be more aware of, here are the positions and opportunities in this marketplace that will allow you to, if they like this place, as we all like this place, that's why we're here, how do we ensure that happens? And there's that connectivity for all those players that are involved in that.
David, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that some people read it the other day. And the subject matter was that in our economy, they were talking about the United States in total, that we have a risk-adverse philosophy in our economy. There's a whole bunch of factors go into that. Taxation issues,
universally, I can answer two ways. One is under 30, probably not. Over 30, probably. The real question is, what are you doing about it? So, you don't want to use a forum to talk about what you're doing, but this community is about ready to launch what's called the Stark Entrepreneurship Alliance, which includes, and if I missed somebody, I'm sorry, but started with Jumpstart on a regional basis. It includes the Canton Regional Chamber, the Y-Start program, Walsh University, University of Mount Union, Tech Alliance 2, which is a software technology, Venture and Alliance, the Stark Development Board. So you hate to run list the Stark State, Kent State Stark, the Small Business Development Center, who are trying to counter the idea that, in this community, we don't think people have other alternatives than simply to go to university and become a teacher or a doctor or whatever. And we used to be there, and candidly, the Assumption Development Board stopped in 1995, and back today realizing that was a bad decision then. But, people say, well, what's causing that? And the answer is because there's not a lot of role models of people saying you can do this and that, although on the college campuses there are. So we're going to have a soft launch beginning next month. You'll see a hard launch of this concept in September. But people are going to notice how all these organizations in a common brand and a common variety of services and experts and that are going to be available to help people. And the second thing is that people in this community said to us over a year and a half ago, we couldn't raise money to create an angel fund here, pre-seed capital. And the reality is we raised over 1.1 million so far, but we're waiting to have the state match that, so we have a $2 million fund. As the idea is starting to make sure capital is available on the equity side to startups and to small companies who want to accelerate. So it's just an attitude thing. Is if you want to do it, you figure out a way to do it. In cooperation, well, one of the things strong about Stark County is that we partner all the time with organizations within this county. Entrepreneurship, I can tell you that fuel cell centers that ultimately led to Rolls-Royce, to LGB here, going to the Timken company and saying, why not look at a model like what Rolls-Royce did to create the Wind Center is another successful model. There's an advanced corrugated paper facility that's hopefully back on the drawing board. It's going to be the only one in the country. We can do this stuff. It's just a matter of you got to get people connected, and then you got to figure out how to go through the obstacles of finding the resources to get there. But so I think we're going to be less risk averse in the future because, frankly, our Y-Stark, our young professionals, are going to demand it in the economy.
I want to go back to something that bugged me from 10 minutes ago. We've talked about the fractured nature of our community. How we've got our Madison silo and our Jackson Township silo and our Kent silo, and we've talked about the advantages that we might find in trying to figure out how to find the leaders wherever they might be to bridge those divides. In my work at the Chamber, I see a group of different kinds of entities who work really well together, and they are the 17 school districts in Stark County, where city school districts like Canton and Massillon work and are appreciated by suburban school districts like Jackson and Lake. Now, there may be some real fundamental economic reasons why the school districts work together. They've got a very strong education service center, and they've got a lot of economic reasons to work together. But there's got to be a reason why the suburbans and the higher income districts have an acceptance and a respect for the urban districts. And I'm wondering from maybe Mike or Adrian whether the local government community or the business community or economic development community can learn something from what the school districts have taught themselves in those areas.
I think it's about the positive experiences that they've had together, the school districts. So they've applied for large federal grants where they've each benefited from the center of the federal grants because you can't get federal grants unless it is for poverty level. So they've focused on Alliance, Canton, and Massillon, but then grew that out of that area. So there have been 3 National Science Foundation grants that have been very large, that have been given to Feels like 5 years ago to over 3,000 enrollments now, which is just huge. And what it really says is that there now is an opportunity for almost every student to do something in the post-secondary arena. So success, I think, has bred that. The other thing I think has bred it is we tend to be unusual in terms of what the state, how the state thinks. And so collaboration has allowed us to be unusual and to stand our ground as unusual folks. So I think that has also, success has been a source.
Mike, can you imagine a way that the school district model could improve the overall community cooperation among diverse and quite different kinds of groups in Stark County? Because you were a superintendent in Minerva, which is an impoverished community compared to some, and then superintendent in North Canton, which has its challenges, but not nearly as many.
We were very intentional using Adrian as a concept of flying at 20,000 feet. Individually, school districts would be very intentional about what's our value proposition of being together. It could be purchasing, it could be sharing resources, it could be not duplicating situations that didn't need to be duplicated, whether it be within our county regionally or broadly as a county. So it's very intentional on superintendent's parts to be around that table and say, what can we do thematically that exists all across all 17 school districts? So I use that analogy, Dave, to broaden and maybe pick up on something Adrian asked about earlier. There's first, for me today, the REC project, the REC project. That would be an example of already having something together that's an asset builder for our area. Use that as an example, and perhaps if higher ed has a similar organization, the chamber yet has another organization, be intentional about putting those folks around the table routinely. So I'm replicating a model in my discourse this morning to say superintendents did it because economy of scale, as well as being very intentional about what we wanted to do about our culture. We don't need a lot of little entities, and we all agreed upon that. So perhaps on this research data, we could put groups that are already together, let that be our asset builder, and then be intentional about meeting routinely and having action planning around that. So I've just very quickly conceptualized the county model of schools with perhaps a business model that already exists. Steve does a great job with economic development. That should always be a player. Higher ed should always be a player. What's going on in that should then be intentional about meeting routinely and coming about with action plans. Whether it's launching an initiative, what we would do on purchasing bus fuel, using a quick analogy, there was an economy of scale in that for us. If we were going to need something in gifted education, we didn't need 18 gifted coordinators. If we could regionalize 3 or 4 districts that were smaller like Minerva to share one, we did. And we found ways to make sure we were paying our share at that time. So I'm going back and forth between the school model and what might present itself as an asset here in our area. I think of Allman Hospital, All Care and Physicians have put together an integrated model that helps them work extremely well with ebb and flow of the business, whether it's insurance or care, or that primary person who the person sees at the doctor's office. They've modeled that in such a way to make it efficient. So I'm comparing school to our vertically integrated model of Altman, All Care and Physicians with what might be integrated here in our community with assets that we already have. So my suggestion would be take the data and let's see what we already have and get those players to the table quickly and then look at concentric circle expansion after that. But keep it moving, intentional, and using little analogies that we've heard about this morning. There's a long-winded answer from a short guy. It says that might be an idea.
It hasn't been, the model that works in Stark County hasn't been translated into the other counties, even in education. And part of the reason for that is that here in Stark County, there hasn't been a for sale sign on the services that are provided through the educational service center. But there is a for sale sign if you go over to Mahone County, which I happen now to know about, or if you go to Cuyahoga County, where the for sale
in the local government? How do we find bridges so that Canton works with Canal Fulton, works with Massillon, works with Alliance, works with Minerva? Are they so much different from school districts that the example is not applicable?
You want me to
Sure.
comment on this one? One of the first things I wanted to do when I became mayor, it's been 5.5 years, 6 years mayor, and we came with a platform and I evaluated what was there when I got there. And I looked at the operations and trying to come from a business background. I thought, we need to streamline some of the stuff to be more efficient, more effective. Our parks department wasn't very effective, our recreation department wasn't very effective. The rest of the world had a parks and recreation department as one. We had two separate. And to try to keep the story short, I made a proposal to merge parks and recreation. Now keep in mind, as the mayor of the city in our structure, we have a separate park board and a park director that reports to that board, not to me. We have a separate recreation department and a separate rec board and a separate director that report to their board and not to us. We do fund the parks, but not the recreation. It gets kind of confusing. This is multiple layers of just the city, Canton's government. When I made the proposal, the park said, oh, we don't like that idea. The recreation said, we don't think we'll save money. Newspapers came out and said, oh, that's not a very good idea. Nobody should merge these departments. And so we then started working behind the scenes, trying to get everybody towards the same page and be more uniform. And I just asked, look, can we at least create one website that you guys would share so that the public doesn't know that it's two different organizations, but if they want to rent a pavilion in our parks, it goes to the park department. If they want to rent the volleyball net next to the pavilion in the park, we got to call the recreation department. So let's have one website, they can click it, and then internally we can handle it based on departments, but the people will have better service. I couldn't even get them to do that. So years gone by, meetings have gone by, and we finally put together, I finally threatened to disband the park board and got them to the table to actually start seriously talking. And as of last fall, we got the parks department, the rec department, the school board, the community organizations, all the groups of parks and recreation to agree that we would move toward moving these entities into one parks and recreation for the city to service our population and those needs better. However, in order to get that agreement, we agreed to put it on the ballot this November for a parks levy that will start the process. If the voters vote to allow us to move forward with this process in November, then 3 years from now, when the current rec levy expires, we'll come back with a renewal levy that will formally merge parks and recreation. If on a second vote of the people 3 years from now, that'll go into effect the following January. That'll be 10 years. 10 years if everything goes smoothly right now with the vote in November and then coming back 3 years from now with the second vote, and then that following January, it'll be 10 years from now I walked in and said, guys, we need to bring these departments together because it makes sense financially, economically, responsibilities. 10 years to merge two city departments in the city of Canton. I'm not talking about other governments. This is just city of Canton. In that same 10-year time period, the city of Shanghai nearly doubled in size and had 10 million people. And I can't merge two city departments together with and you're asking us how we can get a neighboring community or another city with a different legislative body, a different township organization, whatever, to figure out how to work together. It is unbelievably challenging for government to function the way it is structured. The only way we're going to solve this problem is if we restructure government. We need a countywide government, eliminate the townships, the cities, the villages, the county, and have one, like Columbus did. They basically ended the whole thing. They got one community, and then they can make decisions for a region because you got one group of people you're dealing with. Until you figure that out, you're not going to get this thing working. It's unbelievably difficult.
That's going to be the headline repository.
I had to call the opinion thing. So that's the reality.
Mayor, can I ask you a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
Because obviously it shouldn't take 10 years to do that, right? But the process can make it take 10 years. What do people like you need from the civic leaders in this community to shorten that from 10 years to 10 weeks? What's missing that can make the obvious take 10 years? What's missing from it?
Well, and one of the things that Dan Sonny mentioned earlier is that I'm elected by the voters of the city of Canton. job is to represent the city of Canton. Now, I know from a regional standpoint, it makes so much more sense for us to be regionalized. For finances, for income sharing, for, everything. We should be working on a regional basis. But I'm not elected by the voters of the townships or other communities. And so when we have things that come together, when we have an opportunity to do regional ideas, I have to represent my constituency and fight to make sure that whatever that regional deal is, it's fair for us during that transaction. In many cases, the city of Canton would subsidize other areas in these mergers. And so now I'm asking my taxpayers to spend some of our money to help villages or townships that are smaller, don't have any resources, in order to do this merger. And so we're taking a hit to get the regional view that might help us in the long term, but in the short term it doesn't. So people don't understand, maybe councils don't understand, voters don't understand, but I'm asking them to subsidize something today that would be good for them in the long run. It's kind of like, I don't mean to be sarcastic or disrespectful, but it's kind of like a parent telling their child, this is good for you. You don't like it, but it's good for you. You need to do this. And so when we try to tell our voters, hey, this is going to be good for us, and they don't like it, they vote against us. And so elected officials say, yeah, I'm not going to lose my job to do what's right for these people. So I'm going to let them say, if they don't want it, I'm going to back off and not do it. And so elected officials tend to not do what's good in the long run because it doesn't help them in the short run, which gets reelected. So the system is very, very challenging. But I can tell you that we need to have a different view on this, and the election process and the government layers, it makes it really, really difficult.
To Chris's question, I think before you can say, what can we do, you have to have a thorough knowledge of where the problems lie. What's the risk and what's the reward? Obviously from that example, 10 years, there's something that somebody or some entity or some buddies told him up. What's that risk? What are they afraid of? What's the ultimate reward? And I think that that's what you have to begin to look at, even as we look at discussion about more of a regional community here. What's the risk when you start talking about that? We have great school systems, and please believe me, I'm a large advocate of that. We have an education program within the chamber that advocates that. But let me just say this: when we had our first meeting, and Mike, maybe you remember this, we had our first meeting calling the 17 school districts together. There was a lot of angst. What is going on? What is the risk here? And even with their success, we still have 17 school districts. Now, I don't know if that number should be 15 or 20. I'm just saying that you have to understand where some of those concerns and worries and parochial issues lie. So, the reward for the county, if we could collaborate better, is that we work as one. We have one strategy that may have many, many levels. I know that's really polyhedral, but that's really, I think, the goal. What's the risk to get there? I think that's what we have to determine as a community. What is holding us back? And then we have to have elected leaders, business leaders, community leaders, bold enough to ask those questions, be honest enough to face those questions, and then be strong enough to push towards that resolve.
I think, Paul, I would like to wrap by going back to Emily and asking, what is your impression about the things that we were curious about? What surprises you? What didn't we bite on that you thought we would? What are you taking from this discussion?
A couple things. I'll be very honest. I thought shale oil and gas development might be a larger part of the discussion in terms of, how do we take advantage and leverage the assets that are currently in the area in a long-term view instead of a short-term view. But I feel like everyone's so probably tired out by those discussions that didn't happen today. Another piece about parochialism, I will just, for those of you who are not urban economists or don't study metropolitan areas, I think a nice point you'll notice on the little, I think it's a one-pager here. When we talk about the metropolitan statistical area, it occurred to me that I didn't really define what that was for Canton, and it is Stark County and Carroll County, and it might be, as you guys are talking about kind of making the case for more collaboration and more cooperation across jurisdictions, I think it's good to use the data to your favor. And I say that because metropolitan areas are metropolitan areas because they encompass labor sheds. So to understand that the economy works across political borders is really important in all these discussions. So if you're trying to affect things like innovation or education, to understand that these phenomena are not bound by jurisdictions is going to be really important. Those are my two main observations. I'm sure Bob might have others or other folks in the room, but yeah. Mark, did you?
We're about to sit down, and Mark is about to. Thank you very much for your cooperation.
Yep.
As the last item on this morning's agenda, I had mentioned to you that we're all sitting here curious about what are the next steps. How do we keep this discussion, this dialogue moving forward? I'd like to introduce Mike Shafranco from the Civic Commons. Mike will talk a little bit about Civic Commons and how we might be able to use this tool for that furthering discussion.
Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. Thanks for a really great discussion. I learned a lot today about what's going on in this community. The Civic Commons, for those of you who don't know, is actually an outgrowth of something we did at the Fund for Economic Future, which was the Efficient Gov Now program, and Stark County was a recipient for one of those awards. And part of the idea after that program was, well, how do we keep the dialogue going? So we did a contest, we rallied communities to talk about local government collaboration. How do we sustain that? How do we create a platform where people can continue to engage, not just on government collaboration, but on any number of topics happening in their communities? So the fund came up with the idea for the Civic Commons, which was then graciously funded by the Knight Foundation. And the Civic Commons is an online engagement platform. This will give you some sense of what it looks like, where people come and talk about different issues happening in their communities. In addition to that, we work with different organizations and institutions to help them engage their constituents, to provide a place online where folks can connect with each other around these issues. And so, as Mark noted, there's many more people that are not in this room today, many more organizations in the Stark County region that are not here today, that probably want to have some input on this conversation as to what matters and how they can come together to address some of those issues. So we invite all of you to share via your social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you use, via newsletters that your organizations send out, whatever means you use to communicate with your folks to get them into the conversation on what matters to metros, and specifically what matters to Canton and the Canton metropolitan area. Now, as you can see, there are conversations happening in the other metropolitan areas as well, and so as this roadshow goes to Akron and Cleveland and Youngstown, folks from those communities will be talking about what matters to them. The real hope is that people start to see that what they're talking about in their communities is very much transcends municipal boundaries, however defined. And that I think what we'll start to see among all of these patterns is that what matters to Canton is really what matters to Akron. What matters to Akron really is what matters to Youngstown. Now, notwithstanding what Mayor Healy said about the challenges within two departments within one municipality, at least we can at least reinforce that theme that really all the things that we're facing in Northeast Ohio are of a regional nature. And so how can we blow that up and try to have impact at that level while also addressing the issues in our local communities? So again, if you need any help, communicating messaging, or you need any sort of hyperlinks, the main one right there is at civiccommons.com/whatmatters, and it's on your one of your sheets. It's at the bottom there as well. Please again communicate that to all your constituents so that they know that they can get into this conversation. Are there any questions about Civic Commons or anything like that? forward to seeing each and every one of you on there in the next half hour. Thank you.
I began the morning session by welcoming you to to what is hopefully the beginning of a dialogue amongst many of us in the community to answer these very, very difficult questions. I'll end by thanking you for your participation this morning. As I looked around the room, I saw a lot of thoughtful faces. I didn't see anyone closing their eyes or sleeping during the presentation, which is a good thing. There are some very important issues for us to address. As the organizers of this event, Stark Community Foundation, in conjunction with Canton Regional Chamber of Commerce, I think we will, without having spoken to you in any detail about this, but I think it's our responsibility at this point in time to continue this dialogue, to begin to put some structure around these issues that we've talked about this morning. I mentioned early on that I wasn't sure how this 2-hour session was going to unfold. I think we've had some very important dialogue here, important discussion. A number of issues have been presented. No easy solutions to those issues at this point in time. But I think that's the responsibility of all of us in this room, and on behalf of the Community Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce, we will make sure that we continue to drive this issue forward in some type of format that will allow all of you to be engaged. So I thank you again for your time that you've spent with us this morning. I know that this is, if it's planted just one thought in your mind, it's been a successful morning. We have major issues to address here, but I'm confident when we look at examples as we have of the education system in this community, we look at some of the other processes we currently have in place. I'm confident that we will make very, very good progress on this. Emily, I thank you very much for the presentation. Very well done. This information really came to life this morning. It's one thing reading a document, it's another having that presentation made here live and in person. I think you did an excellent job, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So with that, I thank you again for your participation, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing from us here very shortly. Thank you.
Just one second. If you parked in our deck, and I hope many of you did, and you didn't get your ticket stamped, go through our office and get stamped by the receptionist so you get out of the parking deck for free. Thank you.